Well, welcome everybody to the Joint Economic Growth Scrutiny Committee. I'd like to say Happy New Year on a wet, miserable January. I might reserve the right to retract that again. But last year we started off well. We didn't end quite so well. This year, hopefully, we're going to start off not quite so well, but end up very well. So let's hope, everybody. Right, going to meeting properly. Apologies, I've got Councillor Gina Bloomfield and Councillor Simon Pickering. Are there any others?
I've just had an apology from Councillor Sajid Patel, and Colin Chick has apologised. He's running 20 minutes late, but he will be joining us.
Okay, fine, thank you. Thank you. Has anybody got any declarations of interest they wish to put forward? No, I can't see any, so that's great, that's fine. The minutes, item 3. Sophie, do you want to just quickly explain this one?
Yeah, sorry. So I sent an email out to the committee yesterday. Unfortunately, I was unable to publish the minutes from the last meeting, so they'll have to follow over to be considered in March. I do apologise for that, but they will be with you as soon as possible.
Okay. If there's any one particular issue, we'll try and take that on offline. Okay. Item 4, work plan for the March meeting, which will be our last one, I'm led to believe, of this council if the election happens in May, which I'm led to believe is still going to do so at the moment. What have we already got on there at the moment, Sophie? Sorry, I can't see it because I haven't.
That's okay. So just to confirm, we've got the second part of the modern methods of housing construction. So hopefully we'll be speaking to some manufacturers on that one. And then there was a request for the skills agenda update to be brought to this committee, and then a review of the Growth Hub service from the LEP.
Okay, great, thank you. Right, okay. Has anybody got anything they want to add to the work plan or talk to Sophie about potentially looking at for the growth for the or change on the work plan?
Could I come in, Chairman?
Yeah.
I just noted that in the meeting this morning, the committee meeting this morning, that they did talk about the grants that the district have to administer, and there were some discussions about that. And I just thought that might be something that would be worthwhile going on the agenda for this committee for a future meeting.
Yeah.
This is a discretionary grant that the government made available for COVID.
Okay. I think that, well, yeah, okay, we can look into that. I mean, I'll ask some questions, Sophie, if we can look into that to see if we can put that on a future agenda. Obviously, March, it would be too soon for March now, wouldn't it? But it can be something in the future, I guess.
Just to confirm, I will add it to the future list of items. Obviously, if the election goes ahead as planned in May, then March will be the last meeting of this committee. So we would have to pass over to the new committee post the election in May.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else with anything else? No. Item 5, which is going to be a standing item on the agenda. It may well change, come to the new committee, but we've managed to put it on there at the moment. District member feedback. Is there any feedback from any of the district members, please? Can you use your electronic hands, please, if you can? No, nobody with any feedback. Oh, sorry, Kate.
Yes, I know I'm not a district member, but I'm a former district member, and just to let you know that Gloucester City Council, and as Councillor Patel's not here, will be considering a formal method of feedback from outside bodies and committees like this in some constitutional changes that will be made before May. So that will be then part of the normal business of council to hear feedback on what's happening. So I think that's really positive.
Yeah, that's good. Okay. Anybody else with any feedback? No. Okay. Right. The joint committee update, Patrick.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Right, yes, this morning we had, is that okay? Can everybody hear me?
Yeah, just put some coal on the fire, mate.
Yeah, okay. I know, another couple of lumps. Thank you very much. Nice to see you all. Yes, we had our Gloucestershire Economic Growth Joint Committee meeting this morning. There were a number of items on the agenda. The first of which was actually an item that's coming into your meeting now from Kate Haig, Councillor Kate Haig, and she presented the Taxi Licensing Scrutiny Task Group report. The committee noted the importance, basically, of safe and reliable taxi services for economic growth and of having a consistent approach to taxi services across the county. There were also some comments about the need for taxi services within the rural areas as well as within the more urban areas such as Gloucester and Cheltenham. I'm sure you'll hear more about that shortly. The second item was cyber growth. Sorry? Somebody trying to cut in? No? The second item was the cyber growth. And we received a presentation on cyber growth in Gloucestershire from Tim Aikins and Reid Darby and Nick Sturge from Cheltenham Borough Council. We were presented with details on how the project would benefit the county in terms of business and employment growth, progress in the development of the project so far, and how the project fits strategically on a local, national, and international scale. And I think we've all probably seen a lot of this already. The Golden Valley, it is quite a spectacular and ambitious project. The importance of we also noted the importance of developing a digital strategy for the county. And there was discussion on how this actually fits within the cyber project. So that's a bit of work that we're looking at to make sure that we have the right people in place with the right strategies and in the right sort of flow, and to give us a coordinated approach right across the county. The third item was the strategic planning, a statement of common ground. As I'm sure you're all aware, this is the project that was started with John Baker. We've got quite a long way. We're actually in a place where this can go forward. We agreed in principle to the overall direction, and we've asked the senior officer group to refer it to the leaders board so that they can have a little bit more of a close look and in detail look and analyse it in that findings to make sure that they are comfortable across all the districts within the county. Subject to those further comments and views from the leaders board, the final version will be shared with the committee for consideration and by the 7 local authorities. We then had the Gloucestershire COVID-19 Economic Recovery Planning update. This was a verbal update provided on Gloucestershire's COVID-19 Economic Recovery Planning and on GCC's, the county's Economic Recovery Planning as due to COVID. The committee noted that since the last meeting, GCC action plan had been costed, so we've now got it costed, and will be considered, this is going to Cabinet later this month on the 27th for approval. Around £500,000, 500k of funding per annum has been requested to drive the areas identified for action within the plan. Members were informed that indicative approval had been provided to roll out the innovation labs, one of which, a hugely successful one, is here in the forest at Coleford. And I think that's an excellent example of what these innovation labs can deliver on a local level within the districts. And I think that was commented on as well. And is an excellent way forward. Obviously, the situation is very fluid, and we need to focus our response on the pandemic. But as a committee, we're very happy with the progress made to date. We then had a G1st LEP update. This was delivered to us by Dev Chakraborty. The County S151 officer group had been considering options for pooling some of the additional restrictions grant. This is the discretionary scheme, which forms part of central government support to businesses as part of their COVID response. And I think this is what Councillor Robinson was referring to. The group has since received notification from MHCLG that they could only pool together grant allocations for one of the proposed ideas. And this is the idea of helping SMEs to get online. The committee noted that actually which I think is where Councillor Robbie is probably coming from, is to make sure that these discretionary funds are used in the best possible way to the businesses that really need it, to make sure that they get through the pandemic. So we need to make sure that we are targeting where it's really needed to ensure that the county as a whole gets through this in the best possible shape. We also had, then the final element was the business rates pool. Andrew Cummings gave us an update and report on that and our particular position. There were questions asked about how the pandemic may have affected the future of the pool and the implications that may have. But obviously that's something we're going to have to look at very closely as it goes through. The committee did approve two SEDIF funding requests. This is the Strategic Economic Development Fund. And the first is for the City Region Board for a City Region Prospectus, and that was £50,000. And the second bit was for digital or the cyber and digital growth in Gloucestershire. This is £200,000, an ongoing from a similar amount last year. The proviso was the committee asked that the detail of the bids does go through the senior officer group, so that once again we're all very comfortable that money is being spent in the right ways to benefit the whole of Gloucestershire. And within that as well was this, as I referred to before, with the cyber growth, to make sure that we're actually got the right bits in the right place. Following that, we just discovered discussed the forward plan, and one a very good option, I think it might have come from Kate even, was for the committee to look at the county and the effects that Brexit has had on the businesses in the county, and what that effect is going to look like rolling through. And Dev Chakraborty from the LEP has agreed to take that piece of work away and have a look at it. And that was our meeting this morning, Chairman. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Any questions from anybody? Kate?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. There's 2 points in the report I'd like to ask questions about. One, and I think it would be of interest to this committee. One was the point about the digital strategy, and that was very interesting. The digital strategy for the county is outside the work on the Golden Valley, and actually is something that districts and the county council have a very strong interest in. And this committee has taken obviously interest in things like broadband, super fast broadband rollout in the past. So I wonder if there's a piece of work there for this committee, working with the different councils. And I noticed we did.
You've gone, Kate. Sorry, Kate, we've lost you.
Can you hear me?
Can hear you now, yes.
Okay, so did you get that? So that's related to...
We got about the piece of work on the digital strategy for this committee. But
okay, the other bit relates to the City Region Board. Mm-hmm. We're looking at the governance of the LEP later, but it strikes me that this City Region Board, I'm not entirely sure what the governance of that is or what the relationship of scrutiny is. If you look at other parts of the country, there are combined authorities and there's a scrutiny role there, or in large Mets or whatever. But there doesn't appear to be any scrutiny of this body, which is now starting to not only make significant decisions on behalf of the county, but also is being given amounts of money and bidding for money, or deciding what bids should go in. So I think this committee has a role to play there, and there may or may not be time during this remaining civic year, but I think that it's something that we really ought to seriously consider, how we scrutinise the City Region Board, so that we've got real transparency about that decision making.
Yeah, okay. I don't know which officer I'm going to look at to answer that. I mean, obviously, the City Region Board it reports to the main committee in the morning. I'm not quite sure whether then, obviously, because we scrutinise the main committee, whether then we scrutinise them as well. So, Mike, have you got anything to say on that?
Just on both, I can perhaps make a comment if that's okay.
Yes, thank you.
The first one on the digital strategy, of course, the Joint Committee asked the senior officer group to do some work to identify what that would look like and start to scope that. So there's clearly quite a bit of work to be done around that, and I'm sure that at some point this committee will be interested in that. But that this morning that needed more detail, and that's why it's gone back to the senior officer group for that. City Region Board, just very quickly, is established by Leadership Gloucestershire, not the Joint Committee. It's a partnership, and that's what it is, made up of the districts, the county, the LEP, the university, and I'm going to miss somebody out, Chairman, but a wide range of partners around the Leadership Gloucestershire table who are looking at coordinating activity in terms of the growth of the county as a single functioning economic unit. It is a partnership, and I clearly at this stage it's only had one meeting, so it's kind of difficult to suggest that there's much to scrutinise, but I think the committee may be interested in the role of the City Region Board going forward. But it is a partnership rather than a statutory committee at the moment, so it is an informal body as such, which is why Tewkesbury Borough Council this morning was the sponsoring body for the bid to the SEDIF fund for the prospectus. So that was done on behalf of the City Region Board. There's a long way, I think, to go with developing the City Region Board at the moment. The aim really, though, is to provide, I think, a bit of a forum in some respects in terms of the Gloucestershire contribution to the Western Gateway Powerhouse, which in itself is also something this committee might be interested in having a look at some point, in terms of how we pull those partnership issues together. There are some issues, I think, and again, possibly something the committee might be interested in, we could look at long term. It is the issue around the governance around the whole of this at the moment, which is quite interesting, really. But they are very different. The City Region Board is just that. It's a partnership at the minute. I hope that helps. But clearly there will be further work and further interest from this committee, I'm absolutely sure, going forward, Chair, whether it's at this time, at this side of an election or to the side of an election, which is probably more likely. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Can I just briefly come back?
Yes, Kate.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely, it is early days for the City Region Board, and I do understand that, but I think that's why it's really critical to get scrutiny and transparency embedded in it in the early stages, rather than trying to retrofit it on once it has gone wherever it's going in terms of governance. I think we should be part of that conversation about the governance, and we should absolutely make sure it's embedded in it, because, to a member of the public, if it looks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, it's a City Region Board with powers and spending public money, and we ought to be very clear about the transparency and the scrutiny of that. So I hope that means that officers are going to come and talk to this committee very soon about how that governance is going to work.
Chair.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things that probably would suit is obviously try to make the committee one of the consultees on the prospectus, because that governs not only the work that is going to go on at the committee and also how that work might be governed. Just to correct Councillor Haig, it is not a public meeting, and therefore it's a partnership meeting, and therefore the governance suits the partnership meeting. So we'll need to make sure that's reflected in the prospectus. But I think the easiest way is to try and make sure that the committee gets sight of that prospectus, probably in draft form prior to its final circulation.
Yeah, I mean, it was something that I was going to, I mean, obviously, March being our last meeting, but it was something that I was going to hand over, depending on whether, what chairman and whatever's next year. But, Mike's just mentioned, and obviously Steve's just mentioned it. I mean, we've got the Western Gateway, we've got Leadership Gloucestershire, and we've got the City Region Board. We've got 3 different areas there, which, we need to understand now where the governance and how the governance is and what we do. And I think that's something for a new committee when it's, because obviously, by the time we get to March, which isn't too far away, we're done and dusted. So it's something that a new committee needs to obviously look at and take on, really, and include it maybe on the agenda items. Mike, you wanted to come back?
Not hugely, Chair, but just only on the basis that clearly, as a partnership, it's not a decision-making body as such. No. So any decisions that need to be made, for example, the decision that was made this morning for funding needs to come from a formal body, be that the joint committee, as it was this morning. But for other matters, they would need to go back to the constituent parts of the partnership for those decisions to be made. So that's just a comment around that. There's clearly a lot of interest. Gloucestershire, I know there's other items on your agenda, Chair, is a tremendous success story at the moment, I think, in terms of economic growth. And there's growing sort of interest about how we actually facilitate that. So I think all those aspects are going to be of interest to this committee going forward, Chair. Thank you.
Yeah, that's how I see it. So, yeah, Steve, if we could look into that, that would be useful. If we, because obviously it is about starting the communications and how it's governance and stuff. So, yes, if you could, Steve. Anybody else with any questions? Brian, your hand doesn't work then. Your electronic hand.
No, for some reason, just today, because it's normally there is no electronic hand raise function. I maybe will drop out of the meeting and come back in and see if it is there in a minute. But it seems to have vanished, so I'm struggling a bit.
Maybe you haven't got the latest reiteration of WebEx.
Yeah,
there is a new version out.
I did have, so quite why it's gone again, I don't know. But and it was working quite recently. This morning's meeting, I think there was a couple of points. I mean, obviously, the cyber was a very exciting presentation and good to see. I didn't think there was a huge amount of questioning, but there was a question around the clarity around digital strategy and cyber strategy, which I think was important for us to understand, because I think it would be dangerous to confuse them. It may well be that they could be interpreted the same way. But my point, I think, is that there's a digital connectivity of homes and people and city, which is one thing. And then there's the cyber opportunity linked specifically around GCHQ and all the, I suppose, international opportunities that arise out of that. And they both run on the back of digital connectivity in some sense. But I don't think we should muddle them up. So I think that was a well-placed question which we should be following through. But there was another point that seemed to strike me when I was watching this morning, was that we were all doing it from our homes. And yet, essentially, this in opportunity is about a piece of real land which is being developed. And I just wondered whether we should be asking a fundamental question about is a physical presence of the cyber park the outdated idea in the exciting things that were coming forward this morning? Because COVID has changed a hell of a lot in the last 12 months, and I didn't feel anything had actually picked up to ask that question. On the planning work that came forward this morning, it's all been sent off to the Leaders Board with virtually no questions. I wasn't quite sure how this committee would be able to sort of scrutinise what comes out of that, because that seems to have moved it out of our reach. So my question was really about how do we access what the Leaders Board do with it now that it's gone on from the Joint Committee with very few questions being asked. And in fact, I think even the Joint Committee was questioning whether it had a role going forward on that. On the innovation from G first, yes, I did pick up earlier the point about the use of discretionary grants, which I think we should be interested in. But I also noted that actually the Mitchell-Dean Growth Hub is still not yet operational. I think we should be sending a message from this committee to say that that's not really good enough. I went around the site for this when it was partially done. I can't remember how many years ago it was, but the fact is it was so long ago that I've forgotten. It just seems staggering that that's not come on board yet. So thank you.
Okay, right. I suppose Patrick to answer 2 or 3 of those questions, and maybe Mike to chip in with him, or even John. And then I think the last one will be down to maybe David.
Yeah, I'll just come in on a couple of the points then. I think this digital strategy and the cyber and the relationship between these and Golden Valley is important. And that was what we were questioning this morning. Of course, the digital strategy is a Gloucestershire-wide strategy, which encompasses all and is vital to make sure that all the districts are actually part of this strategy and take it forward. And that will include things like the rollout of broadband and all the rest of it. The Golden Valley is effectively a part of that strategy, and so that would come in. It's kind of a key link, and it gives us that foothold, and a very strong foothold in the whole cyber digital space. So it is vitally important, but I think we need to make sure it was being handled the right way around, if you like. The digital strategy was the overarching under which Golden Valley came, as opposed to the digital strategy being developed as an add-on to Golden Valley as such. So I think that's where we need to get that differentiation and make sure it does work through. Then you've got a very good point about, and obviously this is probably something for Golden Valley team to talk about maybe, about the effect of COVID going forward. I personally think there will always be a case for a central space, some offices where people can mix and work. I've certainly noticed that actually the lack of informal communication that you get within an office environment is something that we are lacking in this digital age. So I think you're right, but I do think that actually a hub, and bear in mind the whole idea of this, it is a park as such, where lots of companies can work and operate from the same space. So they also have the ability to mix and merge. So, but I think you've got a good point about how that develops and how that's seen as we come out of COVID. Forgotten. I think there was one other bit I was going to mention.
I think that's for David, I think.
Is it David? Yeah. Okay.
I mean, all I was going to add to that one, Brian, was that, I mean, there's a couple of, in Tewkesbury, there's a couple of built places that develop things for GCHQ as it stands at the moment. And what they develop needs workshops, not just, a digital platform where they can have meetings. It actually needs workshops to develop. So, I mean, maybe that's where it will end up being is more technology based, but development of machinery. I know, for instance, L3 developed the scanners that we all walk through in airports, for instance. Well, that can't be done on a digital platform, like we're doing now. So I think there is always going to be a place for that sort of thing, and maybe that's what's going to happen more so there than just the meeting platform which we're on now. David.
Yeah, just on that first point, if you look at all of the data and the survey work that's been done nationally and locally, it points to a blended approach to working post-COVID, not an extreme approach which is all online, and not an approach which takes us all back into offices and lots of commuting and all that sort of thing. I think you have to remember as well, without the cyber park in place, Gloucestershire has a frankly woeful supply of good quality office accommodation in the county, and has done for a number of years now. And so I've no doubt at all that there'll be significant demand for a good quality campus style environment that will be created at the cyber park, albeit occupancy by individual businesses might be different. I think what it does is it opens up opportunity to get even more businesses onto the site if they're taking a blended approach. On the point of Forest of Dean Growth Hub, there were some delays early on in the process. I had a meeting with Forest of Dean District Council's cabinet yesterday, and this question came up. I think the cabinet in the Forest of Dean have seen the brilliant model that's operating in Tewkesbury and are a little bit jealous of that model and would like to replicate that in the Forest of Dean. So I think there might be some vested interests at play in terms of how the money's currently being spent, because I think that model, when Tewkesbury proposed it, Forest of Dean District Council were not in a position to offer the same kind of facilities and space that Tewkesbury could offer at the time, which has worked really well. So there were some delays in the early part. Recruitment is now ongoing for the navigators that will work in the Forest of Dean Growth Hub by the Vantage Point team. So recruitment is very much underway. The building work is nearly there and is extremely high quality. It's a really good scheme. We're very pleased with the ultimate outcome. But the reality is that we've been in a pandemic for the last 10 months, and that has further delayed the opening of the centre in the same way as it did for Stroud. So the Stroud Growth Hub opened informally 2 weeks before we went into lockdown 1, and has only sort of reopened physically as a service a couple of times in the last 10 months. Similarly, Cheltenham is now ready to go, thanks in no small part to the intervention of the Borough Council in Cheltenham getting engaged in that project, and that'll open later this year as well. So the Growth Hub service is still operating in the Forest of Dean. It's operating virtually as it has been for the whole county. It's operating through the library system as well, very well, particularly because of the innovation centre element that's going on in the forest. And in the last few months, we've taken on 6 new business guides in the Growth Hub who are advising specifically on key sectors and also on Brexit and its implications. So there's a really good service for businesses operating right across the county. It's just unfortunate that we've spent 10 months in a pandemic, and the physical space that so many of the clients right across the county welcomed hasn't been available to them.
Thanks for the clarification. And I think my only point would be to emphasise that post-COVID we will have just as much of a crisis for business that we've certainly got for medical issues now. So that should mean that we should be accelerating our work towards getting these hubs up and running, even if we have got COVID holding us back. Thanks.
Did you want to comment further on that, David, or you're happy?
It's a point very well made, and yes, that's absolutely what we're doing. So the 6 new team members that have been taken on are not just dealing with the fallout from COVID. In fact, they're not focused on dealing with the crisis elements of COVID. They're actually dealing with how businesses move forward both as a result of the impact on their businesses from COVID, but as well how they look at new ways of operating and new ways of working. And Patrick mentioned one of the proposals that came to the Joint Committee this morning around looking at digitisation of businesses, SMEs in particular, and how they can therefore be more resilient. So the Growth Hub work is very much focused on future thinking as well as dealing with the immediate crisis.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else with any questions? John, sorry, you want to make a point?
That's right. Thank you, Jay. I was just going to chip in on the digital strategy point from Councillor Robertson, just to say he's it's absolutely nailed the point that we were making in the meeting this morning, which is that if you read the UK government digital strategy, which I've had the pleasure of reading all 100-odd pages of, there are 7 strands in that strategy, and one of those strands is about cybersecurity. So there are 6 other strands focused on the wider issues to do with digital UK. There's digital access and inclusion, infrastructure rollout, economic growth, so on and so on, open data. So there are many more strands to a digital strategy than a cyber strategy. So the key point that we discussed and I think agreed this morning is that potentially either the LEP Cybertech group nor the Cyber Central group were the right forum necessarily to take on the work of developing a digital strategy with such broad aims. So we tasked the senior officer group to go away and look at what might the best mechanism be for developing a broader digital strategy. So it absolutely accords with what I think Councillor Robertson is looking for. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Anybody else with any questions? No, I can't see anybody. Okay.
Can I just come back quickly?
Yeah.
There was a point I did make about the leadership board and how we would be scrutinising their work, which I would have thought maybe Mike would be able to pick up.
Thank you, Chair, if you wish.
Yeah.
The leadership board clearly is another informal group. It's just where people will come together to have a discussion about the document that was in front of the committee this morning. It's made up of the leaders of all the councils, together with the lead member in those councils for planning functions. So it's an opportunity for them to discuss the document that was there and make any suggestions for amendments they might have before it comes back. The issues really on that particular document, the Statement of Common Ground, is another document that effectively will have to go back to each constituent authority as a planning authority for adoption on an individual basis. So although it's been coordinated in its production by the Joint Committee, the actual adoption of it and the decision relating to it will be the responsibility of each individual council within Gloucestershire. So that's where it is. But the Leaders Board is effectively just a place where leaders and lead members can have a discussion in a bit more detail than was allowed this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Are you okay with that, Brian?
Fine, that's good. And clearly it goes back to the individual council scrutiny committees to look at if they need to. Thank you.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, because I mean, obviously, at Tewkesbury, for instance, we have the digital strategy, ONS. In fact, I think we had it the other day, didn't we, Mike? Do you want to speak again, Mike? No,
only just to comment on Councillor Robinson's point about the councils. I can't speak for other councils, but the adoption of the Statement of Common Ground at Tewkesbury would be a council matter, not an executive committee matter. So that it would be for the whole council to adopt it in the same way as most of the other planning documentation. Thank you.
Okay. I've got a question. It's a question, I suppose, for the LEP. It's with the growth hubs. Obviously, the growth hubs were set up pre-COVID, and we're dealing with businesses again pre-COVID. The world's changed quite considerably through COVID and the digitalization and what it's created, and obviously businesses have had to become very resilient on how they develop themselves going forward, and in a good way in some respects, in a bad way in other respects. But what are we doing about any education or any help for the growth hubs to adapt to that situation? Because obviously the business model has shifted a tad. So I just wondered what, David or anybody's got any comment on that.
The offer from the Growth Hub is evolving all the time and has done over the course of the last 6 years. As we work with more businesses, as we see trends change. So whether that's bringing in people with different skill sets, which is what we've done recently, whether it's looking at the ability to offer grant programs like the one that was talked about this morning to enable more businesses to be digitally savvy. It's using the evidence that we pick up from the survey work that we do, but also the survey work that we see coming through nationally, both from other growth hubs in the network across England and general survey work that's done. The team in the growth hub and the steering board that oversees the overall growth hub partnership are continually looking at how the service develops and changes. The opportunity now is with a blended approach to working, and if, as we suspect, more businesses moving out of permanent accommodation in the same way as they're in it at the moment, then the opportunity for growth hubs is to provide that flexible space where either individual businesses can meet or businesses can meet with each other. And certainly Mike will be aware of, well, he was in the discussions that we've had with Tewkesbury about what next phase for Tewkesbury as a growth hub might be in terms of how it can deliver some of that useful shared workspace for businesses to get together when perhaps they're not occupying large-scale premises in the same way as they have previously. So it's about continual development of the service and ensuring that we're ahead of the game as we possibly can be with the information that we have from businesses.
Okay, I mean, I'm glad to hear that you're bringing in extra help, because obviously somebody who offers certain expertise pre-COVID, there's other people who are going to need extra expertise going forward. And I just wondered who, because obviously we've got some people in the libraries and other things like that, who's looking at the governance of those to make sure that the offering is as good as it should be or could be. I just wondered who checks up on that, or do you get reports back from the various growth hubs back to you? Where is the governance for that?
So in the same way as all of the projects we fund, there are requirements on those who receive the funding to provide usually quarterly reports on activity, that they're going to meet the outputs and outcomes that they said they would meet when they first received the capital funding from us. There's also a Growth Hub board who oversees the delivery of the service, and all of the delivery partners are on that Growth Hub board and engaged with it, so they're sharing information and resources. We've got a shared CRM system across the Growth Hub network, which means that the data that we're getting in one part of the county is being shared across the Growth Hub network as well. So there's a whole host of ways in which that information is being shared. And we're getting information back from delivery partners in terms of how they're performing and what some of the challenges are.
Yeah, I think you indicated to speak, Mike.
All I wanted to say, Chair, was I think you've got an item on the 10th of March meeting to cover this very subject on the review of the Growth Hub service. So I'm sure the committee could delve into that in a little bit more detail at that point. Speaking from Tewkesbury, as David has said, we think the Growth Hub service has been absolutely fantastic, and we really value our partnership with the LEP on the delivery of that for our borough. So thank you.
I mean, all I was picking up was on Brian's point, really, about obviously the world that we're in now is a changed world compared to the one we entered at this point last year. Right. No other questions. So I think we're going to move on to social mobility. So I will hand over to John, I guess, first.
Thank you, Chair. So thank you very much to the committee for inviting to talk about this. I suppose the first thing, an interesting question maybe to pose back to the committee is, what do we mean by social mobility? Because there is no universally agreed definition of what it means. There are various dictionary definitions, and there are sort of various other sort of more colloquial definitions. I mean, colloquially, I suppose we would describe it as making sure that everyone had an opportunity to build a good life for themselves, regardless of their background. Or you might alternatively describe it as having every individual having a fair chance of reaching their potential. But there is no universal definition of social mobility. There are terms such as absolute and relative social mobility and so on. So, and I suppose another interesting fact about this topic is whilst it's generally accepted that some level of mobility in society is desirable, there doesn't appear to be any consensus agreement on how much social mobility is good or bad for a society. And there's no international benchmark of this. But successive governments of all political colours have acknowledged that Britain needs to improve its social mobility, however they choose to describe it. And I think one thing that's sort of fairly, I think hopefully obvious to most people is that in today's Britain, unfortunately, where you start from still has a very big influence on where you end up in life. And these aren't just sort of income or class issues. They also relate to geography. So, for instance, there are outcome differentials between London and the rest of the country, or between urban and rural settings. And some of the most affluent areas of the country deliver much worse outcomes for their disadvantaged children than places that are much poorer, to use that term. So I wonder if I may, Chair, I'll try and be brave and see if I can share a screen, if I'm allowed to do so. Is that working? Is anyone seeing anything on screen? Can anyone say, yeah, that's a thumbs up from someone? Great, okay. I'll try and be even bolder now and see if I can put that. Is that, everyone can see that okay? Okay, so this is a brief timeline of our work, really. What I was going to do is just, so the Social Mobility Commission is a non-departmental public agency of government. It was created under the Life Chances Act of 2010. I can't actually remember whether or not that was the Gordon Brown government or the coalition government. Someone else may know on the call, but anyway, 2010, the Life Chances Act created the Social Mobility Commission, and every year or so they produced some reports. And in 2017, they produced they used to produce a sort of an annual State of the Nation report, and in 2017 they produced this report, the social mobility in Great Britain, which for the first time created defined an indicator for every local authority area of Great Britain, and then they ranked. So they created about 16 indicators of social mobility because there was no international definition. So they created a set of indicators based on sort of various life stages of individuals, and then they created a sort of a composite social mobility score, and then they ranked every single local authority from first, which was the best social mobility, to 324th, which had the poorest social mobility. And I've got the overall scores on the screen there for you. So this report was produced, I think, in the back end of 2017, and it came across my desk, I think, at some point early in 2018. And I was quite surprised by the numbers. I don't know if you are, but I was quite shocked in that Gloucestershire, which is, seen by lots of the rest of the country as a fairly well-to-do area. It has its pockets, but it's not doing too badly. There was an awful lot of what are called social mobility cold spots. Gloucester, Cotswold, Forest of Dean, all in the bottom 20% of all local authorities in the country for social mobility. And only Stroud was ranked in the top 20% of authorities in the country. So we took, just going back to the sort of timeline, if I just flash the timeline back up on screen here. So we took a report to Leadership Gloucestershire in 2018, where we highlighted these indicators in this report. And we suggested that we needed to do something about this, because it seemed clear that certainly many parts of the county weren't performing to the level of sort of social mobility hotspot that we would like them to be. So Leadership Gloucestershire agreed that we would set up a task group to take this forward. So this is one of your classic coalitions of the willing, because I then sort of gathered together a collection of people who said they were interested in the topic from around the county. So we got some representatives from the county council, from the public health team, and from the education team. Pete Carr, as he was then, from county council, looking after the adult education team. We had representatives from most, but not all, of the district councils. We had representatives from some schools. We had the head teacher of Ribston Hall wanted to join this task group. We had representatives from further and higher education, including the principal of Gloucester. Katie Jenkins from the LEP came on board later on in the programme. And we had a representative from the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner. So, and I should say, big thanks to all of these people, because everyone gave up their time and free of charge and on top of their day job, as it were. And I suppose that's part of the problem that this task group faced was we were trying to take forward this project to understand the issue and then to see if we could identify any potential actions and report back to Leadership Gloucestershire. And all of us were doing this on top of our day jobs. So the work progressed relatively slowly. So 2019 and 2020, early part, we did various pieces of analysis and research and then got back together to review those. We went to visit some other areas of the country that had some success in tackling aspects of social mobility. And then sort of back end of 2019, we hit some luck in that we were able to actually get some resources from a county council researcher to start doing an initial review of all of the indicators to identify as a first stage of a two-stage approach, really. So the first stage looking across all the indicators, and then with a view to identifying as a second stage piece of work which of the smaller number of those indicators did we need to do a deeper dive to really get an understanding about what was happening, try and interpret that in terms of what might be causing that, and from there to try and identify what sorts of issues might be occur, actions we might be able to recommend back to Leadership Gloucestershire. So we produced this initial piece of work in early 2020, this overview review, and this indicated a number of areas where there was a particular problem in terms of the life stages of children and young people in particular. So in Gloucestershire, the early years stage didn't seem to be, the early years stage was slightly an issue, but then the stage from primary to the point of leaving primary and beginning secondary did not appear to be a particular issue from that review of our indicators. The issue started where social mobility started to really impact in data terms was in that transition to secondary school. And so we concluded that, sorry, I should try and move that off your screen so it's not in your way. So we agreed to do a deeper dive into early years interventions and activities. We agreed to do a deeper dive into key stage 3 issues in educational terms. And when we were going to do a deeper dive into youth and progress to higher educational phases of the life stages of individuals in Gloucestershire. And then those have been the three aspects of the data that seem to be the ones most worthy of attention and where we thought we might be able to have most impact on social mobility. Now that report was delivered and we met on March the 11th, 2020, which was about a week before we were all put into lockdown. So that's basically when things came smashing into a great big wall of COVID. And the work has not progressed at all since then. Our researcher was actually a public health officer. And as you can imagine, from March onwards, we had absolutely no chance whatsoever of getting public health, given the issues that they were having to deal with, to divert some research attention into a sort of longer term research study like this. So Chair, that sort of brings us back up to where we've got to now. In September 2020, interestingly enough, the Social Mobility Commission produced another report called the Long Shadow of Deprivation, which again looked at the issue about how differences and opportunities arise across England. And what was interesting about this actually was that some of the data had changed. So they had this looked at social mobility from a different angle, which is about where did your average earnings end up, sort of 10 or 20 years after your educational achievements. So they basically were able to do a longitudinal study using data that we don't have access to track people's earnings several years after they'd left education. And again, so it's a slightly different point of analysis, but in this case, they identified none of our areas as being in the least socially mobile areas of England, but they did identify Cotswold on that basis as being one of the most socially mobile areas of England. So there's some contradictions there in terms of the two data studies. In the 2017 report, Cotswold was one of the least socially mobile places, and in the 2020 report, it's one of the most socially mobile places. So that's basically where we've got to, other than the fact that we shared our research with the Social Mobility Commission late last year, and they were very interested to hear what we'd done and to see our research report. And they've asked if we can join a group of local authorities to meet up in 2021 to sort of reinvigorate this work across the country. We appear to be one of the few places in the country that has done some work following the 2017 report and that are interested in the issue of social mobility to the extent that we're all devoting at least some resource to it. So I've had a contact with the Social Mobility Commission just last month saying that they would, once pandemic things are a bit more out of the way, they're looking to set up a small group of interested local authorities and that we would be invited to that group to see if we can share good practice and find out a bit more about what's happening in different parts of the country. So it's been a slow burn, Chair, but it's still a piece of work that I think has value. And at some point, before I retire, hopefully, I hope to go back to Leadership Gloucestershire with some fuller report and some recommendations for action. I'll stop there. Thank you, Chair. Do you want to take questions on that before we hand over to the power of three, or?
We can do, but John, that leads the question: you can't retire until you have then.
I'm hoping it happens. I was being a bit flippant. I hope it happens long before I retire, Chair.
Okay,
but it has been paused for it was slow progress for the first year because of the lack of resources, and it was no progress in the last year because of COVID. So it's not been the most productive piece of work I've ever been engaged in.
So okay, I have Councillor Paul McCluskey with a question.
Thank you very much, John. I thought that was absolutely excellent. And it may be a question that is going to get answered later, but I was fascinated by the part of the conversation where you talked about there wasn't a problem in Key Stage 2, Key Stage 3, Key Stage 4. And then you kind of glossed over what happened from 11 to 16. And I was interested if you had anything to say about youth work or the absence of youth workers, youth clubs and so forth, because certainly from the Cheltenham perspective, I think we are sadly lacking in anything like that. And currently our young people are struggling, with all the structure in their life has disappeared.
It's a very good question. We've certainly had that discussion as a group as to whether or not the reduction in budgets on youth activities has had an impact on this. At the moment, we're still at the stage of trying to gather data to see if we can prove or deny hypotheses like that. So I couldn't give you a definitive answer. It may well do. It may not do. I can certainly, see anecdotally, why, that may have a picture, that may have a role. I've just got a bit of the screen that I didn't share with you that may maybe give you a bit more detail on this. I'm trying to share this. Am I sharing this? I can't see. Here we go. I think I'm sharing that. So as I said, there's about 16 indicators that the Social Mobility Commission came up with to define this overall social mobility ranking. So 3 of the indicators refer to the early years stage of life. And as you can see, there's quite a few reds there. So I think what that's saying to us is what we think we know already as a county, which is there's a number of people who, because of their circumstances of where they live or the circumstances into which they form, are not really at a sort of a good level of development by the time they reach school. But then you get some when you get to the school categories, some of those indicators seem to be greener. So and if you look at the sort of Ofsted rankings, that sort of backs you up. Most primary schools in Gloucestershire have got good or outstanding sort of Ofsted ratings, but when you get to secondary, you get a few more inadequates coming in. So we think there is something there about the transition to primary that is worthy of further study. And then when you look at the youth categories, as you can see, just sort of picking up your point, you can see there's several more reds in that table there. So this is about people taking sort of further or higher education qualifications. So I'm not saying these are the only definitions of social mobility, but these are the definitions that the Social Mobility Commission chose to use, which we thought would be a good starting point. So yeah, long answer to your question, but the short answer is the youth provision may or may not have an impact, and that's certainly a question we'd like to look into.
No, I think I'm just saying thank you. That's very helpful. And Chair, is it possible to put youth work and youth services possibly into our list of things we might wish to look at some stage? Because I think key to keeping people on the straight and narrow, and kids not getting excluded from school, and that slippery slope to everything else.
So, I mean, obviously, I'll have to leave that with Sophie to find out whether we can or not. Yeah, I've got your hand up, Ben, but obviously I've got a queue of them. We can look into that, Sophie. I mean, I'm not quite sure whether it comes under the remit committee, but obviously that's the first thing we've got to check out. Paul, sorry. Okay. John, it's interesting that one set of numbers that weren't red, they were all the same number. Very interesting across all of them.
That's because some data are only county level figures, not district level figures.
Yeah. It was just the fact that it was all across the okay. Yeah. Okay, so John, next.
Do you mean me, Kevin?
Yes, sorry. Yeah.
Okay, I lowered my hand because basically John McGinty answered the question.
Okay.
I was concerned with the underlying data, what criteria was used, and he's explained the criteria that was used certainly for the 2017 banding. I guess one could ask a similar sort of question about what criteria was used for the long shadow of deprivation, but
yeah. I mean, the Commission used a very a very different definition of social mobility for that report. Because they had access to this longitudinal data set, they were able to track people's earnings progression as they progressed through life after leaving education, which was a different take on it, and it produced different results clearly.
Okay, thank you
very much. Thank you.
Okay, right, Ben, you're next.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, John. That was really interesting. I suppose it's a couple of observations and tied in with questions. The research into poverty and deprivation and social exclusion, there's lots of research into it, and it tends to come up with the same findings, different terms, same findings. I suppose the key, or the question I've got, is about the next stage, really, about, you know, it's a great piece of work, and I'm fascinated by it, and would love to talk to you further about it. But I'd be interested to see what the next stage is, because I think quite a few of us would be able to would recognise what you're saying. First of all, you know, in our communities, we'd probably be able to come up as a group now between us with some of the reasons why. You know, and some of those would be politically correct, and some of them wouldn't, but no less honest, I'm sure. And so I'm wondering what the next steps are, and how it goes from this piece of really useful and interesting research into something that becomes transformational in communities. That's the first question. And the second one is just an observation, and I'm not going to get into one about grammar schools because I don't want to, and I don't think anyone does. But I think there are certain grammar schools in Gloucestershire that, whether you agree with them or not, aren't doing the social mobility bit because their cohort is coming from out of county or from such a wide area that even if you believe in grammar schools as being this great social mobility thing, which I guess would be pretty 50-50 in the room, the virtual room, is just not happening. And we know it's not happening. And whether the scope for your work and report is, whether it can take in such fundamental questions as those which to me seem really key to moving on. And then the third point is even more fundamental than that, because a lot of this, it clearly does link back to poverty. And sometimes I'm a bit anxious around people using other phrases or descriptors rather than getting down to brass tacks, which is people haven't got enough money or enough resources to get by. It happened in the late 90s, if you remember, with social exclusion. Everyone started talking about social exclusion. Exactly the same descriptors, signs, outcomes as poverty. It was just a nicer way of saying it. So that's just an observation, really. So there's one question, one semi-question, and then it's an observation.
Okay, thanks. I mean, in terms of what are the next steps, as I said, we're trying to be very data-driven in this piece of work. We think that's important to sort of give weight to our recommendations, because I think you're right. I think we've all got theories about what's driving this, but they're all personal prejudice theories, and that's why we're trying to be as data-driven as we can be. So in terms of next steps, I really want to get back to begging, borrowing and stealing some researcher resource from somewhere across the county to do this sort of deeper dive into the early years stage, the transition stage and the youth stage, and to see we think there are things that we can do, but equally I don't think there's a golden bullet there. I think if there was these are all complex, knotty issues that have been around since the dawn of time. And if there was a very simple answer to this stuff, people would have sussed it by now. So we suspect there's going to be a sort of a very complex set of things. There might be stuff we can do in terms of getting changing the way in which we allocate resources, for instance, across the county, in terms of getting people at a good school-ready age. So we may come back to Leadership Gloucester and say, look, we can't spread the jam equally across the whole county. You've got to have a more focused approach on school age readiness or something like that. There may be conclusions like that we reach, and there may be conclusions we reach about the provision of youth, youth support and youth services. So we're hopeful that we can come up with some recommendations which the members of Leadership Gloucestershire can do something about. And I'd include within that the LEP in terms of some of the stuff we're doing on careers advice, because some parts of the country that have had real success in social mobility progress, if you look at that 2017 report, there's some great examples of how parts of the Northeast have transformed their careers advice and career service. And I think, that's something, again, else we might get into. So answer to your question is more data and more research is the next steps. And I'll also see whether or not we can learn anything from this national group that we've now been invited to join. In terms of the grammar schools point, I think that's quite an interesting one, because when I was trying to recruit some people from schools to join the task group, Sarah Colombini, who's the head of Ribston Hall, she wanted to join because I think she came from quite a deprived background and had some lived experience, and she was now head of a grammar school, a selective grammar school, and one thing she said to us in our first meeting was, when she arrived at Ribston Hall, she was absolutely gobsmacked at how few kids from the local primary had aspirations to go to Ribston Hall or the crypt. There's a primary on the back of the crypt, and when she spoke to the children at that primary school, she couldn't believe how few of them had any expectation at all about being able to get there. And she was just expecting this to be the main feeder school for Ribston Hall. So she was really shocked at that. And I think she wants to be part of the group because she's interested in social change. And I think she thinks if she can get her hands on some report, she can take that to a governor's board and talk about things like intake areas and what have you. So yeah, you may well have a good point there about the grammar school selection process. And I know that's a controversial issue, but it may come up in our research. I won't comment on the poverty question because I think that was a comment, really.
Yeah. Okay, thank you for that. I got Stephen Davis.
Thank you, Chair. Mine was a very mundane question, which is I'm interested in the presentation and data, and thank you for that. There's some really good work going on here. Are we going to get access to this? I'm sure there's a deeper dive into it that would be interesting, particularly those of us also district councillor candidate, district councillors as well. So I'd like to get more access to the data if that's possible.
Yep. So the 2017 data is all publicly accessible, but I can send via Sophie this Gloucestershire analysis that we did for Leadership Gloucestershire. That table I just showed you. If you want that, I can make that available via Sophie to send round to everyone.
Okay, thank you. I think that Mike, you've got your hand up. Did you want to say?
Yeah, just a quick comment, if I could, and suggestion for John, I suppose. Thanks, John. That was really interesting. And I did note that Tewkesbury haven't got anybody on the group, so I'll take that one away. But in terms of the of the economy, what we're actually talking about, everybody on this committee and in the committee this morning wants Gloucestershire to have a fantastic economy that everybody in the county can enjoy. One of the issues around social mobility, it is about allowing people to benefit from and importantly contribute to the success of the Gloucestershire economy. So it might have the first word might be social, but it is actually really couched in the economy and the success of it and the enjoyment that people get from living in a successful economy. So, John, having waffled on about that, I just wondered whether if you're desperate to get a researcher and move the project on a bit, why don't you make a bid to the SEDIF fund for maybe 50k and put a business case together for getting a researcher to support the team as a dedicated option. That was just purely a suggestion from me to John, really. Thank you.
Yeah, excellent idea. Thank you.
I suggest you put pen to paper. You're not writing already, John. I've noticed, Bob, you have your microphone on. Are you wanting to speak?
No, but I'm sorry. I saw I was late into the meeting. I struggled to get into the. I'll turn it off again.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I've got a couple of questions, and obviously one of them, was follows on from what Mike's just said. I mean, obviously not all of the districts were involved in this. The ward that I represent in Tewkesbury, as Mike's probably well versed on, is got quite an area of deprivation attached to it. So I'm one of those councillors that has to deal with that, along with, I think, with Kate and obviously I think also, well, I mean, obviously you several others have mentioned it as well. What are we going to do with the data? Because obviously we need to make sure that we don't just keep number crunching, that we actually then make sure, and as you said, you're going to take it forward, but we want to make sure that we actually, turn this data that you've been out capturing, and potentially if you're going to put some funding in, put some application for some funding in, that we actually then turn this back out to districts and we do something with it. And obviously I'd like to all districts to be involved in that, really.
I mean, we'd welcome someone from Tewkesbury to join the group. It's an open invitation to anyone who's interested in the subject of social mobility in Gloucestershire, really. So we just sort of we asked for a show of hands when we were sitting around Leadership Gloucestershire that one meeting, and I took a note of everyone who shoved their hand up at that point. So there's no closed door. If someone from Tewkesbury could join that group, I'm sure that'd be valuable.
Okay, I hope.
In terms of turning it into actions, I absolutely agree. As I said earlier, my aim is to go back with Leadership Gloucestershire with some actions based on these data, not just a number crunch. Yeah.
Good. Okay, and obviously Mike can take that away from Tewkesbury's point of view. Right. Okay. I think that's it. We got to now go to. Is it Dawn? We're going to next.
Yes, you're coming to Dawn, Bob, and Ian. So let me just see if I can get the slides up. There we go. Can you all see that? I know you've had the slides, but I've got them up anyway.
Yep. This is Bob speaking. Thank you, first of all, for inviting us to come and get involved and put our 2 pence in. I chair the Matson and Robinswood and White City Community Partnership, and many of the things you've been talking about in the last half hour are dear to our heart. So we, in 2015-16, we got a small government grant, which enabled us to put together a local community economic plan. And it ended up being the Power of 3, because we are, as you look at the map, as many of you know, Matson is actually made up of Matson, Robinswood and White City, 3 sort of quite, in some ways, distinctive communities. Matson being a large former council estate, now mostly run by Gloucester City Homes. Robinswood, mostly private, but quite a lot of properties that are let. And then White City, which was a traditional council estate that pre-war and is now mostly greensward housing and private, obviously. So, and we're in the southern corner of Gloucester City, backing onto Robinswood Hill. If you want to, just for those who don't know where we are, you can see a little bit more about it there, where we are. The partnership started as a council initiative in the early 2000s, and we embraced it. We have a number of community organisations, civic society groups, we call them there. And a legacy of community activity in organisations. We saw it as a means to coordinating everything we did on the estate, the bigger estate, the ward, and a place to discuss issues and opportunities. Those were the main sort of driving forces. And in 2015, we produced this plan, and it was it was a new concept for us. It was an economic plan, but it was really about, a lot of it was about social mobility and about people's well-being. It was a new concept. Traditionally, the 3 communities worked on their own in isolation, but this process changed that and we came together much more. Through the process, we had an understanding of our communities and the deprivation in them. And I haven't mentioned that before, but are particularly, certain Matson predictably is the most deprived area of the three. And that's in terms of income, in education, and everything else. It's an area of what the rest of the county would look upon as an area of poverty, some poverty. However, it's got a good community spirit. And we took on, in the first phase of the Power of Three, 6 options. I won't go through them all, but one of them was about reputation. And we felt that we were a poor relation in publicity in the city, and in that way in the county as well. And we wanted to change that approach to how people looked upon us, and more important, how we looked upon ourselves. That we actually had a community that was worth had some pride in itself and in its activities. And we did an excellent night of awards evening, which was just a way to this is a demonstration. We had an awards evening at one of the hotels on the estate, which was well received. The Bishop of Gloucester was there, and Bishop of Tewkesbury, as it happened, Bishop Robert, and we had a great evening of celebrating so much that was good, and so much, and that ranged from children to young people to elderly people, and what they gave to the estate and what they gave to each other. And since then, we've flourished in that sense. We haven't cracked it all, and in that light, at the end of 2018, we decided we needed to revise it. And I'm going to ask Dawn to sort of take over and tell us about our priorities now.
So I'm going to just talk through our plan phase 2, really. I'm aware that you've had copies of the plan, so hopefully you've had a chance to flick through them. So I'm not going to go through the plan in massive detail. What I am going to do is just pick out a few key sentences about the kind of key thoughts and key drivers behind each of the priorities, which of course don't exist in isolation. They're not isolated priorities. They are interwoven and they overlap. So adult skills and economic participation. We know that our communities have a wealth of skills, but often they are unrecognised, uncredited and undervalued. And we know that lots of people in our communities are just getting by, but they are doing just that. They are getting by, living day to day. And there is little capacity for them to engage and develop. So opportunities are really limited. And we know that people are time poor. So we think the more we're able to provide doorstep opportunities for training and employment, the better. Number 2 is about renewal of the built environment. Now, some of you may know that Matson is earmarked for regeneration, but for us, regeneration is more than just about our homes. It's about our community facilities, our shops, our parks and our open spaces. And it's really important that the conversations around regeneration find a common language and that they recognise the opportunities that such massive regeneration will bring for the community. Place shaping has become a really popular term, but we know that to get this right, it's important that we have a really robust integration of economic, social, cultural and environmental goals, and a really co-designed approach that puts the community right in the centre and understands their role as stakeholders, because when everybody else walks away from regeneration, we're left living in our communities. So number 3 is climate change and funding 2050 development. Now, we know the future looks challenging, and although we don't have deep knowledge of climate mitigation or of carbon neutrality, what we do have is ambitious responses to these challenges. We're not shying away from them. There's a development some of you may or may not know about of what we call the Health Corridor on Eastern Avenue, which includes Blackbridge, White City and the recent development at Robbinswood Hill. And these are all, or are going to be, accessible places for people to access to support their health and wellbeing. Now, in particular in White City, we've got plans to build a passive house community centre. And these are massively grand plans, but the climate change agenda has been set and we're responding to it. And it's not an easy response, because in trying to do that, it means, particularly for our building in White City, higher building costs and more technicalities. But what we are trying to do is pave the way to be a flagship project to show how things can be done in our community. Elsewhere, our ward has schools and community buildings and churches that are simply not fit for purpose and really need investment. But what we don't have is the capacity to raise money for those investments. So we really need a joined up policy approach that we can work with. Number 4 is about social imbalance. Now, there are many community projects across our ward that are not seen for the assets that they are. And we really need a more co-productive approach that recognises the capacity, skills and knowledge that our communities have. And this has been massively brought to the forefront by COVID. And actually, I'm really proud of how our communities have responded to COVID and all the need that it's brought about, because we were able to hit the ground running. We have been in our communities day on day, responding to needs as they arise. And so I think that's been a real big, positive for us. We have been able to provide that support. Commissioning approaches and the earmarking of public funds often bypass us, our organisations, and this means that we're often left firefighting and we're simply just trying to raise funds to keep our doors open, and that's a really, really tiring place to be. We're also frustrated that we are constantly having to change our approaches or think of new ways to respond to the kind of recycling and recurring issues that happen in society, when what we do already works. And lots of organisations have been working in our communities for lots of years. I think of my own organisation, we've been around 40 years. So we know our community inside out. We know what we do works. It's frustrating when we have to kind of always think of new ways to do things or required to think of new approaches just to meet funding things. We've shown time and time again that if we want sustained change in our communities, then we have to have the long-term investment. And it's the community organisations and the people that work in those organisations that are putting in that long-term investment. Number 5 is about democratic participation and accountability. We know that when people get involved in communities, it makes them stronger. And we have some great examples across our ward of when we do that really well. We have a great junior warden scheme that works with year 6 pupils in primary schools, and it teaches them all about community and how communities function, how communities make things happen. So we've got lots of great examples of where we're doing this well. And we know that it's vital that conversations at a community level really draw everybody around the table. So residents, councils, other agencies, and then we've got that equal platform to discuss the places that we live. But our informal structures lack the clout and recognition that benefit rural parishes, community councils. So we have to find a solution that works for us and puts us on a par with that. So we're not disadvantaged by not having that lack of clout and recognition. And finally, number 6 is educational attainment up to 21. And I know we've kind of been discussing that previously. So we know that children from poorer backgrounds have worse educational attainments than their better off peers. And we know that an important proportion of our ward in particular complete education significantly disadvantaged to others. We know that digital inclusion is a massive issue. It was an issue before COVID, but COVID has magnified it tenfold. And what it is going to do and what it will do is drive down the educational attainment of our young people. And we can't ignore that. The long-term impact of that, we need to equip ourselves to deal with. So I'm going to hand over to Ian now, who's going to talk to you a little bit more about social capital.
Thanks, Dawn. So I think what you will have been hearing, or what I'm hoping you've been hearing from Bob and Dawn, is very similar to what you were discussing around social mobility. What we can't do is get the social mobility numbers that John was working with down to a ward level, but as part of the preparation for coming up with our new Power 3 plan, we could crunch a number of statistics and come up with an impression of where we are on certain issues. So, for instance, one of the things we discover is that the primary schools inside our ward don't have enough places for all of our children inside our ward. The results, though, we see even before COVID, we could see more children with free school meals condensed inside the ward's primary schools as against going to schools in other areas, which tells us that parents are following a social mobility agenda if they can afford to do so. So if you've got access to a car, which many households inside the ward don't, you're going to take the kids outside of the ward for their schooling, would seem to be the results of what we're looking at. I wasn't sure what you knew about social mobility or anything. I did the same number crunching with the national report that John McGinty did. I wanted to just concentrate, though, that the underpinning all of this is economic mobility. So when we encounter the story of a local young man from Matson, born and raised in the streets surrounding the Gloucester Academy, who gets himself a trade, works out that he can do 80 hours a week on his trade, pay a mortgage, and support a family so that his wife can be at home raising their kids. He then makes the choice not to remain in Matson, but to risk it all on a mortgage in Abbeymead. And there's a number of social mobility things in there that we need to consider. One, the sustainability of his economic model. If he has an accident or a critical illness, the family are not going to raise enough money consistently to pay their mortgage and will slide. And if we measure social mobility through ideas of what people do in their jobs, he's a plasterer and he remains a plasterer. He does very well for himself. So there's all sorts of things and nuances that don't necessarily quite work at a ward level. Looking at what the county already does, and through some of the work I'm doing, there's something interesting you need to remember about your adverse childhood experiences policy and situation. And remembering that wards like Matson are at the blunt end of this, because what adverse childhood experiences lays out for you is the cycles of poverty that families will go through generation after generation after generation. And that's what your adverse childhood experience policy lays out. And it's that passage of complex situations that undermine people's position to take part in something called social mobility that needs to be taken account of, especially in a ward like Matson, where, depending how you see the purpose of council housing is possibly there to catch people who find themselves in complex positions. Overall, then, I'm going to come on to my final couple of points here. What Dawn was really grabbing in our current plan is an understanding that economic opportunity is thwarted by lack of knowledge and understanding. So when you're thinking about policy that will assist social mobility in a ward like Matson and Robinswood, we need to think through not generic approaches for the entire county, but very specific approaches. So because of the way the economics inside the ward are structured, we don't necessarily, what we definitely know inside the ward is we do not have a large number of people with even 2 A-levels. Therefore, we don't have huge numbers of people doing professional jobs. So when we come to schools and bring professionals in, whether they're IT professionals or aerospace professionals or accountancies or doctors or whatever, they can come and give a good talk, but the child hasn't got anywhere to go to understand the pathways they need to follow to then emulate these people that they've been seeing in the daytime at school. So Dawn was exploring this through, and I'm going to throw this back to her briefly. Dawn was exploring through the consequences of this with one of the universities trying to get a connection between an arts project at her centre with the university. And maybe Dawn, you could just quickly tell us something about that.
Yeah, so we had this great thing that we talk about. You can't be what you can't see, and we do a lot of work in our community, and art is one of our big things that we do with lots of our children and people. We've got lots of talented children and people who make great artists, and we had an idea that we would like to take them to the University of Gloucestershire during the summer holidays when the university were on a break, where they could experience the university, go into the art department and be perhaps taught some lessons by some of the tutors and see what university life was like and see what a career in the arts, where that might take them. Because, you know, when you go home, you say, I want to be an artist, people in your house, you know, going to be saying, well, how are you going to pay the bills? That doesn't pay the bills. So the idea is that we could show them actually art opens lots of doors for you. So that was the kind of concept behind the project, but we hit a block at the higher levels of the university that just couldn't grasp the concept of us busing some young people over into the university during school holidays to give them that experience. So it never went anywhere. So we've not been able to kind of expose them to those possibilities.
Now, what Dawn is describing to you then is a well understood approach to inspiring young people around social mobility. I myself have been involved in 2 separate programs around higher education. One where I went down to Bridgewater to a college, to a school, high school, who don't traditionally send kids into Red Brick or Oxbridge colleges or into the top 50 colleges, universities. In order to sit with them and go, right, this is what we do in a university. These are the kind of questions you might be exposed to. These are the kind of pathways you get there. And the 12 young people I was working with there then got an opportunity to go and see an Oxford college and a Red Brick university as part of that scheme. Another scheme I was involved with in a different university, I sat and worked with a couple of kids, getting them to write an essay to university undergraduate standards, which they then received a point for in their UCAS systems. And every child picked to take part in that program was picked from a family that had never sent anybody to a university before. So we've got programs and we've got models, and sometimes we need to tune them, but we need to get a better conversation going. I think I will wrap up at that point.
Okay, I'll stop sharing so we can bring you all back. Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much for that, Dawn, Bob, and Ian. I hope I've got all those names correct, because now you've unshared the screen. You're not all in the line now. So I hope...
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. That's fine. That's fine. I just had it all sorted in my head, and then all of a sudden. Anybody with any questions?
Can I just add that? Sorry, Councillor. Okay. That was just a snapshot. We are obviously we've restricted it to a very small field, but if you have any other questions, do widen it.
Yeah. Okay. Anybody with any questions? Okay, Kate.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks everyone to listening to that presentation. I hope you did find it interesting. Obviously, I'm very familiar with this group and have been involved in the development of these plans. I thought it would be really interesting, given what we've just heard from John McGinty about how the county council and officers around the county and other professionals are looking at a kind of top-down approach to the challenges in communities, that this, which for want of a better phrase, is a bottom-up approach, an approach generated within and by and for that community, and the barriers that they face, which some of which have been described. And I think there's a real question for us about how we as a council, how we as and the organisations we deal with, like Galep, how we respond to that, to the barriers they see, and what we can do to remove those barriers or to lift them a little bit in some cases. And I think there's I'd be interested to hear from the rest of the committee what they thought about that. But for me, having spent a number of years working in Matson, Robertson and White City, these barriers are very apparent, and studies have been done and research has been done. I think this is a programme that really challenges some of our ideas about what communities can also do if we work with them.
Okay, John. So you next, John Murphy.
Yes, thank you. I think it's very sad that young people weren't able to experience working in an art or design environment at the local university. The first question was, I just wonder whether you were able to use any other institutions that had art and design facilities available.
Dawn.
Yeah, sorry, I was unmuting myself. To be honest, we haven't taken that any further, but it's definitely something to consider. Yeah, I'm sure we could. And there's the opportunity to kind of look at using our local artists as well. So talent that exists with our city or already. We know about the Jolt and other places. So it's definitely something that is back on the radar, and we've been having conversations with Striker Light, if people know who Striker Light are, and the Culture Trust about that.
Okay, thank you. The next question I had, or final question I had, was related to numeracy, because obviously basic numeracy as a foundation for getting into science and computer-based careers. And as you know, if you don't have those initial building blocks, that foundation in basic numeracy, you've got nothing to build upon. I could be wrong, but I suspect that it's lack of basic numeracy that holds such an awful lot of people back, and fear of basic numeracy. So I just wonder whether you had any initiatives related to that area.
Shall I jump in?
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. What we don't have in the ward, we don't operate from the community any sort of home, after school home work clubs or anything like that particularly. We've got little bits that go on, but we don't get into that sort of field. There is a broader issue about engaging effectively between a schooling system and a community conversation. I'm trying to be delicate. And that's a bigger, broader question about capacities of schools to actually engage in communities and time and all sorts of things around that. The schools have been helpful in inviting the community groups in on occasion to present what we do in society, particularly to the kids that live in the ward, but we haven't been able to get into a bigger, broader conversation around maths and numeracy. There's not a lot I can say more than that.
And I would just add that, we see it now more than ever when everyone's having to what we call emergency schooling rather than homeschooling, because homeschooling is a choice, is that parents are not equipped to help their children with maths. Even I find it, my son comes home from school, his maths blows my mind. So it's not the maths that I know when I was at school. And so what our ward doesn't have or lacks the resources to, and this is what we talked about earlier when we talked about our buildings not being fit for purpose and having the facilities and resources, we have limited resources for adult education in our communities. We've got the GEM project, and of course that helps, but that has its limitations and its criteria. We've lost the days where we had community colleges and things like that, and that's what we talk about when we want things on people's doorsteps. So if we're expecting a parent to come and gen up their maths so they can help their child, and they're working from 8 o'clock in the morning till 8 o'clock at night, where's the time for them to do that? And those are kind of the challenges that we're up against. That's the reality.
I see. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, Stephen Davis.
Thank you, Chair. It actually sort of follows on from the last question about statistics on numeracy. One of the things I wondered about this piecework, it looks exciting, good, and great, is how do you measure it? I suppose the tactical measures in terms of individuals and you help, and longer term measures, which are probably come out of some of the stuff that was in the previous presentation. I just wondered if you have any metrics. Do forgive me, it comes from sitting on scrutiny committees and a scrutiny tendency to ask for metrics and facts, but I just wondered what metrics you used.
I don't know who wants to answer that.
Comment on that? Yes, obviously getting data is not easy. However, we do work closely with GGT, Gloucestershire Gateway Trust, and our ward is one of their target areas. Does everybody know, if I say GGT, does that mean, yeah? And we do an annual survey. I'm a trustee of it. We do an annual survey of the areas that we work in, and we do build up, and we have built up a year on year, albeit over the last 4 or 5 years, a sense of the direction of where these wards, where these people, how they're moving on or not moving on. So, and we have done quite a bit of research there on areas of deprivation. So, but a lot of it is obviously national. That's not. but some of it is local. So we are trying to build up that knowledge.
We are, and I will just chip in and say that we've talked about developing our own ward baseline, because the difficulty with using other people's figures is that it's very difficult to extract specific figures for our ward, as we've said. So we've got lots of organisations that work across our ward that are all measuring different things, but we're measuring in inconsistent ways. And although that still gives us a really good picture, and along with the GGT survey, that does give us a good picture, we are looking at developing our own kind of baseline that we can measure year on year on year on year on, because the plan will continue to run. So yeah, that's kind of one of our challenges.
Thank you. Brian, you had a question.
Yes, thank you. I think past experience on social mobility probably shows that it increases when we get very disruptive episodes in our life, such as wars and such like, which sort of disrupt the normal process. And we've got one of those at the moment, which is COVID. So whilst there's a fear that COVID will hamper education and other factors, and will be particularly tough for some communities to get through, it's also quite possible that coming out the other side of it, that the disruptive effect and the sort of creative destruction that it brings to business and other things, that will actually enable opportunities to increase social mobility, because some of the constraints. I mean, and we have constraints inbuilt through professional standards and trade standards and educational outcomes. You know, the very fact that students are not sitting their exams as they would normally do is very disruptive. But that may actually undermine the role of exams in the placing of people into their social roles going forward, which could actually improve social mobility as businesses start to look more at who they want to employ or take into their education, rather than what piece of paper they bring with them. So I think whilst it always feels bleak, I think we should actually think that maybe we're on the verge of a huge opportunity to actually move more mobility in future because of the current crisis.
Right, thank you. Does anybody want to answer that, or is that just a statement from Brian? Okay, I don't think there's any more questions. Thanks for that, guys. You described 10 years of my life previously to being a councillor, because I was chairman of Priors Park Neighbourhood Project back a few years, and you know, I know exactly what you're doing. I know exactly what you're going through. One of the things that I was going to ask, I mean, because we worked with the Gateway Trust as well previously, is communication between yourselves, because obviously, you know, there's areas of deprivation that do usually, or well, you know, there are slight nuances, but most of the time they all suffer the same issues. And you know, whilst the wheel is round, the last thing I want to see guys doing is trying to, you know, you're all trying to do the same work, whereas, you know, some people might be able to have done something that you think, well, that's a really good idea, let's share it. Because one of the biggest things I did notice whenever I had meetings with community builders and all the other people was the lack of communication between those people, because they all were in their own little silos. They all had their own targets they had to meet in order to keep their job, to keep their funding. And the one thing they didn't do was they didn't communicate between themselves. It was like, I was in a meeting once, and I was on a table that had a hole in the middle, and I had all these people around this table, and I described them as this table because there was a hole in the middle, and they did not communicate across it. And I didn't know if you guys obviously suffer the same issues, and maybe, you know, to start the ball rolling is just to communicate between your own groups. Because there are, I mean, I know Tewkesbury, Priors Park has exactly the same issues as you do. And, you know, they've got a neighbourhood project there that, you know, they're working really hard like you guys are to try and change that. And I just wondered, if you work together, there'd be more power. Question.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree, and that was part of the reason for the first Power of Three, that we were divided, we were going nowhere, but united we could do something. So the three areas coming together, and really there's sort of three organisations, major organisations on the estate. That's the Venture in White City, Geo Communities in the middle, near edge of Matson Robbinswood, and then Together in Matson up at the Redwell Centre at the top end of Matson. And the three working together make a much stronger base. Not only just so that we don't clash on things, but that we can work together. We did a summer program when we came out of COVID. We did a summer kitchen, which was a food and to help families out during the holidays, but also to bring people together again while we could, socially distanced. But so we had 5 days of food all the way through the summer holidays, hot food, which was a great social get together. And in addition, we had organisations coming in, people like Strike a Light, Play Gloucestershire came. Dawn will give me some more ideas as well. But it was on TV at one time, so it did get some local, regional acclaim. But it was a great working together of community.
Yeah, what I'm sort of trying to point out is obviously you're asked, Kate's obviously asked the county to look into this, but I mean obviously we're talking about not just you three, we're talking about the county, and there are other areas just like yours in the county that have got the same issues, and maybe I don't know how we can do it or how you can do it, but maybe trying to just communicate together might show a more united front again, because if you want the county to listen, it's got to be the county that does it. I know, for instance, Ben, I don't know if he's still on the call or not, but I mean, Ben, in Churchdown, I've met Ben in an earlier life because, he was a youth worker and doing exactly that sort of thing in Churchdown. So there are issues everywhere. And I've just wondered if there was any way, and the Gateway Trust, I think, might be a good example of maybe trying to do that, working with all of these other people to show this example, maybe.
Yeah, we'd be up for that.
Okay. Kate.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And picking up from what you say, I think there is a real need for across the county in communities that are similar to this, building up that resilience and then sharing those experiences. One of the things I think about Matson, Robinson and White City is, they do get the agencies around the table with them as well. It's not just the groups in the community, but it is also the local NHS. It's also the community builders. It's also the Wildlife Trust. So it's not a closed door to any agency, and very much people are welcomed into those meetings so that the community can benefit from it. And I think it certainly is a model that we could look at. But there was a democratic ask in that presentation as well, and the talk about parish councils. And for the last 4 years, I think I've raised parish councils at almost every other meeting. But where we've got unparished areas, those powers and structures don't benefit communities like this. And I think that's a democratic ask, perhaps, of the county in terms of thinking about, as we go forward, how we work with communities. And I know the Public Participation Task Group did have something to say about that as well. So I hope that having heard this, it's given us all some ideas about what we can do to change how we as a county council and also other organisations that we work with, in particular the LEP and the City Region Board, think about how they're going to develop the communities they say they want to see.
Okay. Right, thank you for that. As I say, thanks very much, guys. Dawn, Ian, and Bob on your presentation. And John, we wait with bated breath with you bringing your report back, because obviously I think that one's going to be quite important too. So thank you very much for that, all of you guys. Very informative and very useful. Some of us are probably a little bit more know a little bit more about it than others, but very informative. Thank you. Right, thank you for your time. Item 8, local housing, and I believe, Mike, you're going to lead on this one.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this report I think you asked for, which went to the Joint Committee at its last meeting, is something of an annual update report for members that it draws together the states of play across all the districts in terms of our strategic plans, position, and future developments. It says local housing, but it covers a wide range of issues in terms of transport and infrastructure, and also economic growth in terms of provision for employment, land, and the like. Having said that, it is on your agenda for information. There's only this report really at the moment in the county that pulls all this together, and so it's really a point of reference for members. Can I just say that it's now a few months old, so one or two things have moved on. Indeed, the last item in the report mentions a statement of common ground, which we've already discussed and was discussed this morning. But it's here for members' information, really, Chair. The content is factual, really, and it is just so you can see what's happening on the other side of the fence, I suppose, for members, because you often know what's going on in your own area, but not so certain about what's going on elsewhere. So I thought it would be helpful for the committee members to have sight of this in the committee for reference, if nothing else, Chair. I'm happy to take questions, but there's a bit of a health warning with that, and that is in terms of the plans that I don't have any that much detailed contact with. I'd have to go away and come back with the answers, Chair. But as I say, it is for members' information, so you've got that copy as to where we are at the moment. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks for that, Mike. Yeah, I don't see anybody with any questions anyway, apart from, sorry, Brian. We really must get your thing fixed, Brian. It's quite very difficult to try and chair a meeting without seeing electronic hands.
At least if you're only looking for my hand waving, it's easier for you.
No, it isn't, because you're on another screen.
Okay. My question really is under 7.3, and it's the proposed new standard method requirement, which seems to show a disproportionate increase for Cotswold, Forester Dean and Tewkesbury. I just wondered if there was a reason behind that, or even if it's still the right figures. Thanks.
Okay, Mike.
The government have pulled back on their new standard requirement. That just gives you an idea of the indication, I think, in terms of what would have been required had the government pressed forward with that algorithm that they've now indicated isn't right. So we'll wait and see what comes back from government in terms of that. And this report was written by our planning colleagues before that was changed. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Did you want to come back, Brian?
Fine.
Okay. Stephen Davis.
Yeah, actually, that was my point as well. Those numbers are now no longer correct. The government has withdrawn them. And actually, I think they've issued new ones. I think I've seen a number for Stroud that actually is lower than the current method by, 10 houses or something. So I think it's worth noting that that's no longer valid.
Thank you, Chair. That is the case, and I should have made that point when I presented the report. But I did say it had been, it was somewhat out of date. But the other figures in terms of our plans, of our existing plans, of course, are adopted plans.
Okay, thank you. I can't see anybody with any other questions. And Brian, you're not waving your hand, so I've just checked. Right. Okay. Item 9. The taxi licensing task group. This is Kate's going to present on this. It's been to the committee this morning. It's slightly the wrong way round because it is a group. It is a task group that's set up by us, but obviously because they met this morning, they had to have it before we did. But I have told them that, you know, if there are any recommendations from us, they will go back. It will go back to them. This is recommendations, but obviously it's the district councils for our district members who will be aware that this is under your auspices of licensing. So obviously it's for you to then obviously take on board, and how much you do or how much you don't do is you know, it remains within your powers. Okay, Kate.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you to members for bearing with us while we do this in this slightly unusual fashion. I would like to thank all the members of the committee and the officers who attended and supported it. We had some very wide-ranging discussions. Taxi and vehicle licensing affects a number of areas, not just the licensing aspects, but a whole range of other things. And we tried to consider all of them in a Gloucestershire context. We were keen to bring people around the table together to discuss these issues because we saw as a committee, indeed, that there was an economic factor in the taxi and licensing trade, and some of the changes coming and already in place even that would affect how that trade operated and how that supported our businesses and our communities. So, for example, app-based private hire. You know, there's a number of companies out there who are expanding all over the country and having a reaction to that help to protect our local trade as well. And whether or not, you know, we did consider looking at, you know, whether or not there would be space for a local app that would support that, and you know, that might be something that comes in the future. That would be something for the trade to decide, but nonetheless something that we considered might be a possibility. When it comes to licensing, obviously licensing is done by districts, and districts are therefore entitled to have different approaches and different ways in which they look at who is suitable. But given the experience around the country, there are some authorities who suffer a lot from a neighbouring or nearby authority who have very different standards and will do things like give licences to people who have been denied licences elsewhere or have had them revoked. So one of the reasons for having some commonality across the county would be to avoid that situation. So just as an example, someone having a refusal in Gloucester City being able to go to Tewkesbury, get a licence and operate entirely within the city of Gloucester. Not only does that not seem to be particularly fair approach to drivers who do get licensed in Gloucester, but also it starts to bring into question how officers can actually enforce and work with drivers who come from outside their area. I use a local example, but we do know there are some authorities in this country who their drivers turn up maybe hundreds of miles away from where they're originally licensed. And that's a real concern. In terms of how the trade operates across the county, obviously there's some parts of it are very busy, the city and Cheltenham, and in other parts it's more actually having taxis and private hire vehicles available at all that is the issue. So when it came to looking at standards and vehicles, things like introducing electric vehicles, we didn't want to go at the pace of the fastest because there might be a threat then to the trade in the rest of the county. So we tried to adopt a sort of median approach so that as the time was right, and we all know that we're going to move towards electric vehicles and better standards in time, that is something that those individual authorities can then adopt. There is an issue for the county here as well, because we do piggyback off the licensing regimes of the districts. So there's an issue for us in understanding and being able to work with those regimes. And in particular, that's why the recommendation is there to sign up to the National Register of Revocations and Refusals. I'm glad I was able to say that, the NR3, because that's a really good tool for licensing officers if they're looking at someone who's coming forward with an application, just to see if there's a flag to say that there's something has happened in another authority that relates to that person, and then we can be sure that when we're looking at this, we've got all the information and evidence available to make a proper judgment about an individual, a fit and proper person. I briefly touched on electric vehicles. There clearly is a feed into our climate change agenda as a council, not only in the kind of vehicles used, but actually, enabling people not to use cars, private cars, and as an extension to public transport, so getting to and from stations or even major bus routes. And we did have Councillor Nigel Moore in to talk about his ambitions with community transport and how the taxi and licence trade might fit in with some of those ambitions. There's an equalities agenda as well, that for many residents, this enables them to live a fuller and more active life. It allows access to education, to health services, and to work. And in certain parts of the county, that would not be possible for them without the taxi trade. So I hope I covered everything there. It was a long, and it started before COVID, and some of the challenges that we're going to face with the trade after COVID are going to be significant. But I do hope that this is a good step along the way of having a really joined up approach across the county, which benefits our local economy and our local residents. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate, and thank you for chairing that and the work that the committee did. Right, have we got anybody with any questions for you? Stephen.
Apologies, I hadn't taken my hand down. No, I don't have a question.
Oh, okay, right, no problem. Right, Brian, I can see you now waving. I've flicked across the screens.
Yes, thank you. More of a comment than a question, because I was actually on the task group. But my comment really was, I found it a very interesting task group because it did highlight the difference in challenges across Gloucestershire between rural and more urban areas. But also the need to take some of the initiatives forward, for example, to try and encourage the uptake of electric vehicles to reduce carbon emissions, to make sure that if you've got a disability, you can get a taxi anywhere in Gloucestershire without any restrictions, and also to make sure that the licence trade is safe, because there are new entrants and different people operating in the sector. And those things all cost money, which makes it quite difficult to invest in those if you've got a low level of activity. And I think overall, what I came to was the fact that we do undervalue travel costs. We tend to do the comparison with the marginal cost of travelling in a private car, which is just petrol cost, and then assume that the taxi trade should be operating at some sort of small multiplier of that. When in fact, once you add all the costs of transport in, that's not possible. And I think perhaps one of the things we don't appreciate is that transport going forward should reflect the full cost of travel, including environmental and safety factors. So, yeah, I think it's a very useful session, and I think the outcome of greater cooperation across the districts may well actually have been brought into effect simply by having the task group bringing more together. But yeah, useful exercise.
Kevin, you're on mute.
I was going to do it once in a meeting, and that's it. That's my one and only sin. Okay, I've done it. Yeah, we one of the comments they made this morning was that it was very Gloucester centric, but I mean, obviously, you did have in some areas lower take up than in others. Well, obviously, whenever we do any surveys, the take up is, somebody's okay with it, then they don't tend to say anything. If somebody's not okay with it, they tend to say an awful lot. But yeah, so. What I did notice is the disparity between the different authorities, one not allowing a license and another one doing it. And I'd heard that in my own district, so obviously that's why when you mentioned it, I thought, well, yeah, because obviously there needs to be some communication between the districts to stop that from happening, which hopefully this is going to do. Mike, you commented on it last time. Have you got anything to say on it this time, or you quite happy with it?
Only that just to comment that I said this morning that the chief execs will identify a senior officer to support the licensing officers group. Licensing officers tend to be around middle management, and I think it's important that this piece of work, if it's going to go forward, has the support of a senior officer from around the county to do that. So the chief execs will identify an officer to bring that forward. Thank you.
And you did actually mention that this is probably one of the first. Well, it is probably the first time that we've got all districts together and done this
at member level, Chair. Absolutely, and I think the idea that Councillor Hay put forward that the licensing lead members would be good for them to continue to meet on a reasonably regular basis to monitor the progress that we're doing here, as well as this committee. Yes, the licensing officer group has been around for some time, but by pulling this piece of work together and inviting the lead members, I think it's a great step forward. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, and thank you, Kate. And yes, it will be good to see if there is any progress in meetings going forward. Thank you to all the committee that were taking part of it. It did sound like it was a really good thing. Unfortunately, there were 2 or 3 of the dates I couldn't make, so I declined from being on it. But thank you to all those committee members that did. Fantastic. Okay, I can't see anybody else with any hands up. Everybody seems quite happy with that, so we'll just put that forward with the comments from this morning, and then Mike, you can get the various groups to look at it. Thank you. Right, over to David now and governance of the LEP. David.
Yeah, thanks. You've obviously all received the reports and the links to the various formal governance criteria that we have in place for the LEP. Happy to take any questions on that. And Mally's joined the call, who can certainly help with some of any detailed questions that we might have. A couple of things I would highlight. One is for a number of years now, we've had a really excellent relationship with the county council as our accountable body. That's worked very well in terms of ensuring that the money that the LEP board is making decisions on is being spent in the right way, that the contracts that are in place with providers that are coming along and taking some of that capital spend in particular are robust and strong, and we're able to get reports on a regular basis in terms of how individual organisations are delivering against that. And I would say that since Steve Mawson's arrival in the County Council, that's got better, because Steve now, as 151 officer, attends LEP board meetings. So we've got that direct link into the work that he's doing. I think the other thing I would say, sort of informally, when I talk to colleagues across England that run LEP, so fellow chief executives, they're not all as fortunate to have such a strong relationship with their accountable body, and it's been a source of some tension, lots of tension for some LEPs. So it's good that we've got that really strong relationship in Gloucestershire. The other thing I would reflect on as well, compared to other areas, is the way in which the LEP are brought into discussions at the earliest stage on various issues which are to do with economic growth and development in the county. Is really positive and way ahead of some of how some other parts of the country operate. And I think that's borne fruit in some of the schemes that we've been able to work on and support that local authorities have delivered, or vice versa, where we've got support from local authorities for the work that we've done. So our engagement in Leadership Gloucestershire, our engagement in the City Region Board, our engagement in the Joint Committee and in this Scrutiny Committee. We're also a member of the Health and Wellbeing Board as well, and I think all of those are relatively unusual in the LEP world. Not unique, but relatively unusual. And I think it's really good that we can be part of those discussions, so that the economic imperative can be reflected in decision making that other organisations are making, and that we can take influence and impact from the discussions that go on in the wider context in those groups as well, into the thinking around development of strategies like the local industrial strategy. So just a few reflections from me really on top of what's in the paper, but obviously happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you. I've got a couple of questions. Steve, did you want to add anything to that before we move on, or Mike?
No, it's fine by me. Thanks for the compliment, David.
Okay. Mike, are you okay with that? Or Mally? Anybody? No. Okay, Mally, did you want to add something in?
No. As David says, we've had a couple of presentations to this to this group in the past, so I don't want to go over old ground, but happy to take any questions if anybody's got anything to ask us.
Right, I've got Councillor Nikki Packer.
Thank you, Chair. When the performance scrutiny of the LEP was discussed last year, it was clear that there is no check to see how a funded project worked out, no sort of looking backwards and learning from any mistakes. For example, the LEP administered a grant to a tourism business in the Forest of Dean that claimed to be wildlife friendly, but the spending of that grant has resulted in that business being subject to the planning enforcement case due to non-compliance with planning commissions to protect endangered species. I'm wondering, is this sort of feedback and looking back over scrutiny been set up now? And for example, who can I speak to about this case in particular? Is there a mechanism now set up?
I think it's probably helpful if I answer that. I'm not sure which the project is, but I think it's likely that this isn't one that actually came through the LEP, unless David knows differently. I think it's probably one of the European funded projects.
Which you did administer, yeah.
Which we facilitated, yes, certainly. But I'm very happy if you want to, outside of this meeting, come to me with the details of that. I'll certainly follow that up with you, and we'll find the right way for you to find out more information. Very happy to facilitate that. On a broader note, as David mentioned, we do, with all of our projects, we actually hold them to account monthly, quarterly and annually in great detail. And that feeds into an evaluation that we will be doing towards the end of the local growth programme. And certainly there will be lessons learned as a section of that. So I think the point is well made that it needs to happen. And what I'd like to do is reassure you that we are, right from the beginning of the programme, we have had in place opportunities to check that projects are delivering what they say they're going to deliver and more. In many cases, they're delivering way beyond the base level of what they said that they would deliver. So we will have mechanisms for that, and perhaps that's something that could go on to a future scrutiny when we've got something distilled down that we could share with you. But I do want to reassure you that we certainly take that very seriously as part of our role in the team that I'm in to make sure. And the programme management group that David mentioned alongside the accountable body, we meet very regularly, and a lot of that is holding projects to account and what we're doing about dealing with any issues that arise around that. So I think perhaps this is an area that maybe you hadn't come across, but we just want to reassure that's what we do.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I mean, that is something that I think we did talk about, coming once you've done any reports or you've gotten any information, that you would then bring them back to the committee for further, examination. Thank you.
Okay, I think just to say, we could flood you with reports, and the last thing you want is that. So I'm reassuring you that we are doing that work. If you could give us a brief of what you would actually like as a committee, we could come and report to you on that in a distilled way. Very happy to do that. And maybe towards the end of this financial year is a good time to do that. And give us what the question is, and we'll come back to you, because literally we have an annual report for every project that we've dealt with, over £100 million worth of projects. So far too much information as it stands, but give us the question and we'll give you the answer.
Okay. I mean, obviously it's just to know that the projects, it would be just an overarching view, not necessarily a project by project view, but an overarching view on how you've performed with your money this year would be something you could report.
So I think the short-term answer in the paper, there's a link to the assurance framework. in there, there's the detail of how we hold projects to account, how we monitor and evaluate them. So that information is there for you at the moment. And what I suggest is when we do our evaluation, which we're doing for government towards the end of this financial year, we come back to this in the beginning of the next financial year. We come back to you with a report that distills, like an executive summary of that.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, Paul McCluskey.
Thank you very much. One of the growing concerns of plenty of people is so-called ethical investing, the idea that they don't want to have their money in fossil fuel and so forth. And it manifests itself in something called ESG investing, environmental, social and governance. Certainly, as Cheltenham Treasury Management, we've had discussions about where it's appropriate to put our money and using that as a philosophy. But you can't have ESG investing unless businesses, small, medium and large, are behaving in an environmental and socially responsible way. So I wondered whether this was on the LEP's radar. It's particularly relevant for Cheltenham in big things like Golden Valley. Do we want to partner with people who don't take their climate change and social responsibility things seriously, right down to individual planning applications? Should we be, if not, we can do it at the moment, but we are tending to the view that we would like to see our people coming along with carbon neutral solutions. So yeah, just a question. Does the LEP behave in a ESG way itself, and what opportunities does the LEP have to encourage the businesses within Gloucestershire to do the same?
David, do you want to?
We don't have money invested, so none of the money that we receive comes into us. It all goes via the accountable body. So whilst the LEP board are making the decision on where the money is going, what projects it's being spent on, it's not held by us in the main. There are a couple of exceptions where we're project lead. So as an organisation, we're not investing, so we're not part of that story. We've actually been running a series of board seminars for the LEP board, and the last one we did, which was, what day is it now? It's Wednesday, isn't it? It was last week. Was about equality, inclusion, and diversity, and how and the role we might play in that. And that was twofold. That was one about us as an organisation and a board, as well as actually our ability to influence others, businesses in the county, in terms of equality, inclusion and diversity. And we've got another session. It's actually the final of 5 board seminar sessions tomorrow afternoon, which is looking at the whole climate change agenda and what that might mean for LEP decision making and board decision and strategy, given what we've committed to in the local industrial strategy around that agenda. So that will then lead us to have some very clear guidance on what it is that we would accept and invest in the future in terms of grant funding. And I think probably what that will show is that some of the things that we've done previously, like many organisations, we probably wouldn't do in the future. But that's the challenge now. I hope that answers the question.
Well, I think it's a work in progress, and yeah, I for one will be interested to know how that develops in the future, because I think we've seen with Trumpism just what happens when you're only concerned with the bottom line, and I think we wish to distinguish ourselves as being ethically minded, that in terms of satisfying our customers, ensuring the people who work for us are well looked after and everything else, and that the environment is looked after. So hopefully it's a virtuous circle.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think you'll find that the bigger end investments that you do, or the bigger end projects that you fund, they are ethically anyway, but it's the sort of medium to smaller end that you'd have to probably do more checks on rather than the top end. But sometimes the top end do bend the rules a bit, shall we say? So yeah, it's always something that we need to look at. Right, I don't think I've got any more questions for you, David. So thanks for waiting for so long. And you've got Paul. And now you're talking without your microphone on.
Yeah, sorry. I thought I had left my hand up and I was trying to lower it. So.
Oh, right. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Right. Okay. And I think that's it for that one. So thank you very much, David. Thank you very much, Mally. And we will obviously talk again soon. Right. These are information items only. The Executive Director's report, I don't know if the Executive Director wants to say anything about this or whether we just take it as noted and move on.
Actually, I assumed you, because it said no, so I assumed you were just going to take it as noted today.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, but I was just offering you just in case there was anything that you wanted to add to that. That was all.
No, I mean, unless there's any specific questions that people may wish to ask me, having read it, but I wasn't going to actually comment on it directly.
Okay, I've got Brian. You've got your hand up.
So just a question on flooding. We had a fairly significant flood event just before Christmas, which isn't sort of mentioned in the report. I just wondered if you could just update us on how well Highways coped with the response to that event.
The team, I think, given the magnitude of the flooding, did incredibly well on the run up to Christmas, and in fact were almost non-stop from 3 or 4 days before Christmas right through to January, because it was the same team that was dealing with the flooding that was actually dealing with the immediate aftermath of the gritting as well afterwards. So it's the same people, so it's almost non-stop for probably about 7 or 8 days. The other thing is that the flooding was of a very different nature, and we are compiling a list at the moment as part of a report back to Environment Scrutiny that will identify, first of all, just identify the locations where the flooding took place, because for many people it's a different flooding to what we've ever had before, because it was surface water runoff, and what we're used to in Gloucestershire is full fluvial flooding from the rivers where they burst their banks, and I wouldn't say totally predictable, but fairly predictable. We know generally where it's going to happen and when it's going to happen, because we've got the flood coming down the river. This was something that happened, literally hit us from almost like left field, because with the ground being as saturated as it was actually getting houses and flooding taking places on roads and in houses halfway up hills, which is almost unheard of, because it just run off from fields and that sort of thing. And that's where the real difference was. And of course, the runoff from the fields includes one hell of a lot of muck and mud, which then fills the gullies up at the same time. So you end up with a double whammy. So, I mean, we're looking at it at the moment. First of all, we want to build up a database of where it happened, and then see where we can look to where we can carry out improvements. But it's not going to be an easy one, this, because it could be down to, someone told me that, and we're still researching this, that it was equivalent to about 4 weeks of rain for that time of year fell in 24 hours. So if you look at that, and on top of the fact that it was already one of the wettest Decembers and the wettest Novembers we'd had, the ground was so saturated that it just immediately went to runoff. That was a problem. So it's something we need to look at and look towards for the future. And I wouldn't say there's nothing else we can do. There are things we can do more in terms of ensuring gullies are emptied and ditches are dug and things like that alongside the roads. But it's not going to be an easy solution or predictable solution, because it can depend on the volume of rain and the level of intensity and the wind direction, and obviously the amount of rain that's fallen before. So it's all of those things we need to look at in the future.
Thank you.
As well, Brian, there is now a scrutiny task group being set up to look at lessons learned over the floods from the previous flood and a couple before that, to see if there's anything we can, the scrutiny committee can add to that, because we did one after 2007 and we felt it was time to start one again, and that's coming to the Environment Committee. So just to help you with that one. Right, Kate.
I was just going to make the same point, but it is similar to the kind of flooding we had in 2007. But of course, things have been put in place as a result of that. So the issues have moved, perhaps. But yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Yeah, I mean, the problem is with 2007, since 2007, a lot of us have learned that the Environment Agency never look at pluvial and fluvial, do they? They look at out of river, but they very, very rarely look at what comes out from the sky, which we need them to actually have a little bit more of a look at, because this last flood was very much out of the sky, not out of the river. Tewkesbury suffered with flooding, but it was because there was already water in the fields where the water goes to. So, obviously it couldn't go anywhere, but, it was status quo. But, for you guys up on the hills to get flooded, that was a strange one. Okay. I don't think there's anybody else got their hand up. So thank you for that, Colin. As I say, it's normally for noting, but, just in case there were any questions. Thank you. Right. Future meetings. We've got the last one on the 10th of March. We can all wish each other goodbye or arrivederci or whatever. And then we've got one on the 9th of June, the 15th of September, the 20th of October, and the 17th of November. But we will see you all on the 10th of March. Thank you all for attending, and see you soon. Cheerio. Bye.